The ballroom fell silent. It wasn't a gradual hushing, but a sudden, sharp intake of breath, a collective gasp that sucked the air out of the room. 2,000 of the city's most powerful people, a sea of glittering diamonds and tailored tuxedos, stood frozen, their champagne flutes halfway to their lips. The sound that replaced the chatter was the quiet, insistent clicking of 100 phone cameras. They were all pointed at the grand entrance. A moment before, the room had been buzzing with the self-important drone of the elite, all centered around the evening's host, Mrs. Eleanor Vance, who stood radiant and brittle in a gown the color of money. Now she was forgotten. A vehicle had arrived, but it wasn't just any car. It was a Rolls-Royce Phantom, long and black and silent as a shadow. Its presence was an event. 2 men in dark suits, with earpieces glinting, emerged first, scanning the crowd with impassive eyes. They moved with an unnerving economy of motion, securing the space around the passenger door. Then, one of them opened it. A man stepped out. He was tall, dressed in a Tom Ford suit so perfectly cut, it seemed woven from midnight itself. His name was Cale Asongwe, the mysterious tech billionaire who had donated an unprecedented $10 million to the Vance Foundation charity gala, and whose presence was the evening's grand prize. He was handsome in a way that was almost severe, his features sharp and intelligent. But it wasn't him that made the room stop breathing. It was the woman on his arm. He turned and offered his hand into the car. A moment later, she emerged. It was a vision. She wore a gown of liquid gold, a creation that shimmered and flowed around her like molten sunlight. It was a masterpiece of design, but woven subtly into the fabric, catching the light like whispers of history, were threads of authentic kente cloth, a nod to a heritage she wore not as a costume, but as a crown. Her hair was styled in an elegant crown of braids, and on her face was a smile that was not practiced or performed, but genuine, radiating a light that dimmed the crystal chandeliers above. She was breathtaking, and to Eleanor Vance, she was a ghost. Eleanor's face, so carefully constructed with layers of foundation and powder, seemed to crack. The polite, 60% cosmetic dentistry smile dissolved, replaced by a mask of pure, uncomprehending shock. Her eyes widened, her manicured hand flying to her throat. "No," she whispered, the sound lost in the cavernous silence. But everyone could read her lips. Everyone saw the horror bloom on her face, because the woman in the golden gown, the woman who looked like a queen, the woman on the arm of the city's newest and most powerful benefactor, was Amara Okoro, her former caregiver. The woman she had fired and publicly shamed, calling her a common thief just 1 year ago. Amara didn't look at Eleanor. Not yet. Her gaze was soft, fixed on the room with a quiet composure that was more powerful than any declaration. She walked beside Cale, her steps measured and graceful, not the hurried, harried steps of the caregiver who used to rush through the Vance mansion, trying to remain invisible. She was the most visible person in the room. As they moved, a path cleared before them, the city's elite parting like the Red Sea. They were headed straight for the stage, but their path took them directly past the receiving line, directly past the frozen figure of Eleanor Vance. Cale paused, his eyes, dark and unreadable, landing on Eleanor. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. It was not a greeting. It was an acknowledgement of a debt about to be paid. Then he looked at Amara, his expression softening into something so tender and so profound it made several women in the audience sigh. Amara gave his arm a gentle squeeze, her quiet strength flowing into him. She was ready. The past was about to meet the present, and for Eleanor Vance, the future was about to end. The crowd held its breath, waiting for the collision. They had come for champagne and charity. They were about to witness a reckoning. If you love stories where the humble rise and the proud fall, where character is weighed and worth is finally recognized, hit subscribe right now and turn on notifications, because the payback in this story is not just legendary, it is poetic. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. 1 year earlier, Amara Okoro's world was not one of golden gowns and silent Rolls Royces. It was a world of worn-out sneakers, the rumbling of the 5:30 a.m. bus, and the persistent, low-grade ache in her back. At 28, she carried the weight of 3 lives on her slender shoulders. There was her own, a blur of double shifts and exhaustion. There was her 17-year-old brother, David, a brilliant, quiet boy with a galaxy of artistic talent, trapped in a world that only valued what was practical. And then there was her mother, thousands of miles away in a small town outside Lagos, whose gentle voice on the phone was both Amara's anchor and her most pressing responsibility. Amara was a home health aide. It was a job of immense intimacy and almost complete invisibility. She bathed, fed, and cared for the bodies of people who were fading from the world, all while being treated as little more than furniture by the families who hired her. She moved through the grand houses of Houston's wealthiest enclaves like a ghost, her presence essential but unacknowledged. She worked 2 jobs. Her primary position was with the Vance family, caring for Mrs. Eleanor Vance's elderly mother, a sweet, forgetful woman named Clara, who had taken a quiet liking to Amara. Her second job was weekend shifts at a nursing home, a place that smelled of disinfectant and quiet despair. Between the two, she managed to scrape together enough to cover the rent on their tiny 2-bedroom apartment, keep David in school supplies, and wire $300 home to Nigeria every month, without fail. Her secret weapon, the one thing that was entirely her own, was her cooking, specifically her pepper soup. It was her mother's recipe, a fiery, fragrant broth that was more than just food. Her clients, the ones lucid enough to taste it, called it healing. When Clara Vance had a cold, Amara would brew a pot, and the old woman would sip it, her eyes clearing for a moment as she'd whisper, "This tastes like love." Amara would just smile, stir the pot, and feel a flicker of pride in a life that offered few opportunities for it. The Vance household was ruled by Eleanor. She was a woman who performed wealth with the breathless desperation of an amateur actress in a leading role. Her life was a carefully curated stage of charity luncheons, designer labels, and a rotating cast of friends who were more like competitors. Her husband, a man with a booming voice and nervous eyes, was in commercial real estate, and they lived a life leveraged to the hilt, a palace of debt built on the illusion of success. Eleanor treated Amara with a kind of dismissive cruelty that was almost worse than outright abuse. She never used her name, referring to her only as the help. She would leave lists of impossible tasks, complain about imaginary dust, and speak to her in a tone usually reserved for a disobedient pet. Amara endured it, for Clara, and for the paycheck. A paycheck of $725.37 that landed in her account every 2 weeks, a number she knew down to the cent. It was the price of her dignity, and she paid it quietly. Her mother's voice would echo in her mind during the worst moments. "A gentle river wears down the stone, my daughter," she would say. "Be the river." The end came swiftly, and with a casual brutality that stole Amara's breath. Clara passed away peacefully in her sleep, Amara was the one who found her, holding her cool hand and whispering a prayer before making the call. She had genuinely cared for the old woman, and her grief was real. Eleanor's was not. After the performative tears and the flurry of funeral arrangements, Eleanor called Amara into the study. "This is your final check," she said, pushing an envelope across the mahogany desk. It contained 1 week's pay. Amara looked at it, confused. "Ma'am, I am owed for 2 weeks. I worked the full pay period." Eleanor gave her a smile that was all teeth, a smile that was 40% real and 60% cosmetic dentistry. "Really? Because it seems something of my mother's has gone missing. A small silver brooch. It wasn't valuable, of course, just sentimental. But it's gone, and you were the only one with her." The accusation hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Amara felt the blood drain from her face. A brooch? She had never seen a silver brooch. "Mrs. Vance, I would never take anything. You know that." "Do I?" Eleanor said, her voice dripping with condescension. "All I know is that my mother's brooch is gone, and you're suddenly very concerned about an extra week's pay. It's a classic story, isn't it? The poor, grasping help." Amara stood there, her heart hammering against her ribs. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the lie. The casual, venomous ease with which this woman was assassinating her character. "I did not steal from you," Amara said, her voice low but steady. "It was the river against the stone." Eleanor laughed, a short, sharp, ugly sound. She stood up and walked to the door, opening it. The housekeeper and the gardener were standing in the hallway, pretending not to listen. "Get out of my house," Eleanor said, her voice now loud enough for them to hear clearly. "I will not have a common thief under my roof. Get out. No money, no plan, no place to go." Well, she had a place to go. A tiny apartment where her brother was probably waiting for her. But she walked for hours, the words echoing in her head. Common thief, grasping help. The injustice of it was a physical weight pressing down on her chest. She finally made it home, her face a stoic mask. David knew immediately something was wrong. He was a quiet observer, just like her. He just came over and hugged her, and in the safety of his arms, she finally let a single, hot tear fall. She told him what happened. His young face hardened with an anger she'd never seen before. "I'll go there," he said. "I'll tell her." Amara shook her head, wiping her face. "No, we don't fight fire with fire. We will be the river." It was her mother's wisdom, but it felt hollow in her own mouth. The lost pay was a disaster. It was the money for the rent, for the wire transfer home. For the next 6 months, life became a desperate scramble. She lost her references. The agency put her on probation. She picked up cleaning jobs on a gig app, scrubbing toilets in houses even grander than the Vances, the smell of bleach clinging to her clothes. She sold her mother's gold earrings, the last piece of real jewelry she owned. Yet, through it all, some core of her spirit refused to break. Every evening, on her way home from whatever grueling job she'd worked, she would pass a homeless man who sat on a flattened cardboard box near the bus stop. Most people ignored him. Amara started saving a portion of her own meager dinner for him, a sandwich, an apple, sometimes a small container of jollof rice. He never spoke, just nodded his thanks, his eyes full of a deep, weary gratitude. She was giving away what she barely had. Her mother's proverb echoed, this time with more force. "The hand that gives is the hand that gathers." Amara wasn't sure what she was gathering, besides exhaustion, but she kept giving anyway. It was the only thing that made her feel like herself. 6 months after the day she was fired, the day that had cleaved her life into a before and an after, the universe decided to shift. It was a Tuesday in November. A miserable, cold rain was falling, the kind that seeps into your bones. Amara was standing at a bus stop, her thin jacket doing little to ward off the chill. Her shift had run late, cleaning a downtown office building where the employees had left takeout containers and coffee cups scattered like the aftermath of a feast. She had missed her usual bus, and the next one was 20 minutes away. Her feet throbbed, her stomach growled. All she wanted was to be home. Across the street, at a busy, chaotic intersection, she saw him. He was a man of indeterminate age, dressed in a simple, clean but worn coat. He held a white cane, sweeping it tentatively in front of him, the red tip a small beacon of vulnerability in the blur of headlights and rushing traffic. He was trying to cross. The pedestrian sign flashed its white walk signal, but the cars turning right didn't care. They sped around the corner, their horns blaring with impatience. The man flinched back from the curb, disoriented by the noise, the rain, the sheer aggression of the city. People rushed past him, their umbrellas tilted, their faces buried in their phones, locked in their own private worlds of hurry. No one stopped. No one even seemed to see him. Amara watched, her own discomfort forgotten. A familiar ache bloomed in her chest, the ache of seeing someone invisible. She knew that feeling. She lived it every day. The bus was still 10 minutes out. Her feet screamed in protest. The rain was getting heavier. It would be so easy to just stay put, to huddle under the meager shelter of the bus stop and mind her own business. It was what everyone else was doing. But then she saw him take another hesitant step forward, right as a large SUV barreled around the corner, spraying a sheet of grimy water that soaked his trousers to the knee. He stumbled back, his cane clattering on the pavement, and something inside Amara snapped, not with a crack, but with a quiet, firm click of decision. She was the river, and the river doesn't flow around the stone. It embraces it. She took a deep breath, pulled her jacket tighter, and walked out from under the shelter, into the rain. She crossed the street at the crosswalk, her eyes fixed on the man. As she got closer, she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his head was cocked, trying to make sense of the auditory chaos around him. He had a kind face, she thought, etched with lines of worry. She stopped a foot away from him, not wanting to startle him. "Sir?" she said, her voice soft but clear over the traffic noise. He jumped slightly, turning his head in her direction. "Yes? I saw you were having trouble crossing. The traffic is terrible right now. Would you like some help?" He was silent for a beat, and for a moment she thought he would refuse. He seemed guarded, cautious. Yes. Thank you," he finally said, his voice a low baritone, surprisingly rich. "I would appreciate that." "Of course," Amara said. She gently touched his elbow. "My name is Amara. May I offer you my arm?" He nodded, and his hand found her arm, his grip light but firm. "Thank you, Amara. My name is Kai." Together, they waited for the light to change again. This time, with Amara standing firmly beside him, a small island of calm in the rushing current of pedestrians. The cars seemed to take notice. They waited. When the signal flashed, she said, "Okay, we can go now." She walked at his pace, her steps measured, describing the path ahead. "The curb is a little high here. We're halfway across. There's a large puddle on the left." They reached the other side, and she guided him onto the safety of the sidewalk. The rain was relentless now, plastering her hair to her scalp. "There you are," she said, with a small, cheerful smile he couldn't see. He didn't let go of her arm. "Thank you," he said again, and she could hear the genuine relief in his voice. I seem to have gotten turned around. My phone died and I'm not familiar with this part of town. He mentioned a street address. I think it's a few blocks that way. Amara knew the address. It was in the opposite direction of her own apartment. It was at least a 15-minute walk. Her bus was definitely gone now. The next one wouldn't come for another 30 minutes. She would be walking home in the dark, in the pouring rain. A wave of exhaustion washed over her. She could just point him in the right direction. That was enough. She had already done more than anyone else. She looked at his face. He wasn't looking at her, of course, but his expression was one of quiet distress. He was lost, vulnerable, and alone. She thought of the homeless man she fed, of her mother's words about the hand that gives. It was a test, not from God or the universe, but from herself. What kind of person was she, really? The one who helped when it was easy, or the one who helped when it cost her something? "It's more than a few blocks," she said gently, "and it's a bit of a confusing route. You know what? It's no trouble. I'll walk you. I'm headed that way anyway." It was a lie, but it came out so easily, so naturally, that it felt like a species of truth. A look of immense gratitude softened his features. "Are you sure? I don't want to be a burden." "It is not a burden to help another person," she said, the words simple and direct. "Come on, let's get you home before we both melt." And with his hand still on her arm, Amara walked him away from her bus stop, away from her own path home, and into a future she could not possibly have imagined. The address Kai had given her led to a modest, clean, but unremarkable apartment building. It was the kind of place young professionals or graduate students might live. Solid, safe, but utterly anonymous. Amara led him up the 3 steps to the front door, her hand still a steady presence on his arm. "Here we are," she said, guiding him under the small awning that offered a brief respite from the rain. He fumbled in his coat pocket for a moment before producing a key. "I can manage from here," he said, his voice still holding that note of deep gratitude. "Amara, I don't know how to thank you. You were the only one." "It was nothing," she said, though her soaked jacket and aching feet told a different story. "I'm just glad you're home safe." She started to turn, ready to begin her own long trek home, the thought of a hot shower a distant, beautiful dream. "Wait," he called out, his voice sharp with a sudden urgency. She turned back. He was standing there, the key in his hand, his head tilted towards her. "Why?" he asked. The question was so direct, so raw, it caught her off guard. "Why what?" "Why did you help me? So many people, they just walked by. They were annoyed. You missed your bus. You're soaked. You walked me all the way here. Why?" There was a tremor in his voice, a desperate need to understand that went far beyond simple curiosity. Amara paused. She thought about giving him a simple, polite answer. It was the right thing to do. But something in his voice, a shared frequency of loneliness, made her honest. She thought of her mother, of the lessons that were the very bedrock of her soul. "My mother taught me that you don't need sight to see a person in need," she said simply. "You just need a heart that is paying attention." The silence that followed was profound. He didn't move. He didn't speak. But she saw his shoulders begin to shake. Just a slight tremor at first, then more violently. He brought a hand up to his face, covering his eyes, though he already wore dark glasses. A sound escaped him. A choked, ragged sob that seemed torn from the deepest part of him. He turned away from her, facing the wall of the building, as if to hide the sudden, overwhelming wave of emotion. But she could hear it. The sound of a man breaking down. Amara was frozen. She had expected thanks, perhaps an offer of money she would refuse. She had not expected this. Not this raw, shattering display of vulnerability. Her first instinct was to leave, to give him his privacy. But her feet wouldn't move. Her training as a caregiver, her innate empathy, took over. This was a person in pain. You don't walk away from a person in pain. She took a hesitant step toward him. "Kai, are you all right?" she asked softly. He shook his head, unable to speak. He was trying to stifle the sounds, but another sob broke free. It wasn't the cry of self-pity or frustration. It was something else, something deeper. It was the sound of a dam breaking, of years of carefully constructed walls crumbling into dust. Amara reached into her handbag and pulled out a small, crumpled packet of tissues. She touched his arm gently. He flinched, but didn't pull away. "Here," she said, pressing the tissues into his hand. He took them, his fingers brushing against hers. His hand was trembling. She waited patiently, the rain dripping from the awning, a rhythmic counterpoint to his ragged breaths. After a long moment, he seemed to regain some measure of control. He wiped his face, though he kept his back to her. "I'm sorry," he finally managed to say, his voice thick. "I don't know what came over me. You must think I'm crazy." "I don't think you're crazy," she said, her voice calm and soothing. "I think you're human." She paused, then added, "You look like you haven't had a warm meal in a while, and you've had a rough day. Would you let me bring you some soup sometime?" He turned around slowly. His face was blotchy, his expression one of utter astonishment. "Soup?" Amara gave a small, shy smile. "I make a very good pepper soup. My mother's recipe. It's healing." He stared in her direction, and for the first time, she felt like he was truly seeing her, despite the dark glasses, despite the facade. He wasn't crying because he was blind. He had been crying because, for the first time in a long time, someone had truly seen him. A person in need. Not an obstacle, not a burden, not an opportunity, but a human being. And her simple offer of soup, an act of pure, uncomplicated kindness, was more than he could handle. "Yes," he said, his voice cracking. "I would like that very much." That night, a few blocks away, a man sat in the driver's seat of a black Mercedes Maybach S680, a car worth more than the entire apartment building his boss had just entered. Marcus had been Cale Asongwe's driver, head of security, and reluctant confidant for 15 years. He watched the rain streak down the windshield and sighed, checking his watch for the 10th time. Operation Find a Decent Human Being is now entering its 3rd hour, he muttered to the empty leather interior. Phases completed. Fake stumbling, fake disorientation, successful acquisition of a guide. Current phase, lengthy emotional debrief. He'd seen Cale go through a lot. The meteoric rise of his tech company, the betrayals, the parasites who flocked to his wealth. But this was new. After his last fiancée had been exposed for systematically funneling his money into her own offshore accounts, Cale had become a recluse, cynical, and withdrawn. Then, one day, he had come to Marcus with this insane plan. He would disguise himself, strip away every trapping of his identity, and walk the streets as a blind, lost man. "I need to know if there's anyone left," he'd said, his voice hollow. "Anyone who would show kindness, not for what they can get, but for what they can give." Marcus had thought he was insane. "Sir, with all due respect, there are apps for this. Very efficient apps. You can filter by kindness to the visually impaired, I'm sure." Cale had just given him a sad smile. So for weeks, they had been doing this. Cale, trained by a mobility specialist to move and act convincingly as a newly blind person, would venture into different neighborhoods. And for weeks, he had been met with indifference, annoyance, and on one occasion, a pickpocket who had tried to lift his decoy wallet. Marcus was about to suggest they abandon the project when tonight happened. He watched through the rain as the young woman, Amara, walked his billionaire boss to the door of the decoy apartment. He watched as she turned to leave. And then he watched as she turned back. He couldn't hear their conversation, but he saw the way Cale's body language changed, the way he collapsed in on himself. He saw her step forward, not away. When Cale finally returned to the car an hour later, he was a different man. The cynical hard shell was gone. His face was scrubbed clean by tears, and in his eyes was a look Marcus hadn't seen in years. Hope. "She's bringing me soup," Cale said as he slid into the back seat, his voice filled with a sense of wonder. Marcus just nodded, putting the car in gear. "Of course she is, sir," he said in his usual deadpan. "Shall I have the chef analyze it for poison?" Cale laughed, a real, genuine laugh. "No, Marcus. Just clear my schedule for Thursday evening. I have a date with a bowl of pepper soup." Amara kept her promise. 2 days later, she arrived at Kai's apartment with a large thermos and a small bag containing a loaf of fresh bread. She felt a little foolish. She was bringing homemade soup to a man she barely knew, a man who had cried on her shoulder for reasons she didn't understand. But she had made a promise. He opened the door as if he had been waiting right behind it. "Amara," he said, a warm smile on his face. "You came." "I said I would," she replied, stepping into the small, neat apartment. It was sparsely furnished but clean. "I hope you're hungry." She served the soup in 2 simple bowls she found in his cupboard. The aroma filled the small kitchen, rich with ginger, garlic, and the secret blend of spices her mother had taught her. He ate slowly, savoring each spoonful. "This is incredible," he said, his voice full of awe. "You were right. It feels like healing." And so began their strange, beautiful friendship. Twice a week, Amara would visit. She would bring food, not just pepper soup, but jollof rice, fried plantain, egusi stew. She would describe the dishes to him, the colors, the textures. In return, he would listen. He asked her about her life, and for the first time, Amara had someone to talk to who wasn't her brother or her mother. She told him about David's art, the incredible portraits he could draw that seemed to capture people's souls. She told him about her dream of one day opening a small restaurant, a place called Amara's Bowl, where everyone would feel welcome and nourished. She even told him, after a few weeks, about Mrs. Vance. She recounted the story of the accusation, her voice quiet and heavy with the memory of the humiliation. Kai listened to it all, his face a mask of quiet intensity. He never offered advice or platitudes. He just listened, creating a space where her story could exist without judgment. When she finished the tale of Mrs. Vance, he was silent for a long time. Then he simply said, "Her cruelty says everything about her and nothing about you. A person's true value is revealed by how they treat those who can do nothing for them." He was testing her in his own subtle ways. One evening, he accidentally left his wallet on the counter. Amara saw it as she was cleaning up. It was a worn leather wallet, and peeking out of it was a fan of bills, several $100s. For a fleeting moment, she thought about the $1,450.75 Mrs. Vance had cheated her out of. This was more than enough to cover 2 months' rent. It would be so easy, no one would know. But the thought was gone as quickly as it came. That wasn't who she was. She picked up the wallet, walked over to where he was sitting on the sofa, and placed it directly in his hand. "Kai, you left this on the counter. You should be more careful." He took it, his fingers closing over hers for a second. "Thank you, Amara," he said, and his voice was thick with an emotion she couldn't quite decipher. "I know I can trust you." He began to do things for her in his own roundabout way. After she told him about David's talent, he told her he volunteered for a small, anonymous community arts fund. A week later, a package arrived for David. It was filled with professional-grade art supplies, canvases, paints, charcoals, far beyond anything they could afford. The attached note said it was an emerging artist grant from the fund. David was ecstatic. Amara was suspicious, but when she asked Kai about it, he was evasive. "The fund looks for talent like your brother's. He deserves it." Another time, she mentioned that the refrigerator in her apartment was dying, making a terrible clanking noise and barely keeping food cold. 3 days later, her grumpy landlord showed up at her door with a brand new refrigerator. "Don't know why," he grumbled. "Some anonymous donor called my office, said they'd pay for a new fridge for this unit if I installed it by tomorrow. Weirdest damn thing." Amara knew. She looked at Kai during her next visit, her eyes full of questions. "The universe is just balancing the scales, Amara," he said with a gentle smile. "Let it." Their bond deepened, moving beyond friendship into something quieter, more profound. She found herself looking forward to their evenings together, to the sound of his voice, the intelligence of his questions, the feeling of peace she felt in his presence. She was falling for the blind man who lived in the simple apartment. She was falling for his heart, the only part of him she was allowed to truly see. She had no idea that a few blocks away, Marcus sat in the Maybach, shaking his head. He bought her a refrigerator, Marcus sighed to himself. A man worth $3.7 billion, and his big romantic gesture is a Kenmore. This is either the most brilliant or the most idiotic courtship in human history. 3 months to the day after they met in the rain, Kai asked Amara to dinner. Not at his apartment, but out. "There's something I need to tell you," he said, his voice serious. "Something important." Amara was nervous. She dressed carefully, choosing a simple but elegant blue dress she'd found at a thrift store. She expected him to call a cab. Instead, at exactly 7 p.m., a car pulled up outside her building. It was not a cab. It was the black Maybach, gleaming under the streetlights like a polished obsidian jewel. A man in a crisp suit got out of the driver's side. It was Marcus. He opened the passenger door for her. "Miss Okoro," he said, his face impassive. "Kai sent me to pick you up." Amara was utterly bewildered. She slid into the back seat, the leather softer than anything she had ever touched. The interior smelled of wealth. This is Kai's car?" she stammered. "It is one of them, ma'am," Marcus replied, his voice a dry monotone. The one of them hung in the air. Amara's heart began to beat a little faster. Something was happening. The world was tilting on its axis. They didn't drive to a restaurant. They drove out of the city, toward the exclusive enclave of River Oaks, a neighborhood of sprawling estates hidden behind high walls and ancient oak trees. The car purred through a set of massive iron gates that opened silently as they approached. They pulled up in front of a house that wasn't a house. It was a modern palace of glass, steel, and white stone, glowing in the twilight. It looked like something out of a magazine, a 12,000 square foot masterpiece of architecture cantilevered over a ravine. "We're here," Marcus announced. He came around and opened her door. Amara stepped out, her thrift store dress suddenly feeling like rags. She looked up at the house, her mouth dry. "Where are we? Is this a restaurant?" "No, ma'am," Marcus said. "This is Kai's home." He led her through the massive front door into a living room that was larger than her entire apartment building. One wall was a sheet of glass, looking out over the twinkling lights of the city below. The furniture was sparse but exquisite, and in the center of the room, standing beside a grand piano, was Kai. He was dressed in a simple, elegant black sweater and dark trousers, but two things were different. First, he was standing with a posture of absolute confidence, of ownership. This was his space. He belonged here. Second, and more shockingly, he wasn't wearing his dark glasses. His eyes, a warm, intelligent brown, were open, and they were looking directly at her. The breath left Amara's body in a rush. The room seemed to spin. She put a hand on the back of a nearby sofa to steady herself. "Kai?" she whispered, the name a question. You can see." He gave her a sad, gentle smile. "Yes, Amara, I can see." He took a step toward her. "And my name isn't Kai. It's Kale. Kale Asongwe." The name didn't mean anything to her, but the house, the car, the way he was looking at her, it all began to crash down on her in a wave of confusion and dawning realization. "I don't understand," she said, her voice trembling. "I know," he said softly. "Please, let me explain." He led her to a pair of soft, white chairs overlooking the city lights. He didn't sit down. He stood before her, like a man delivering a confession. And he told her everything. He told her about his company, a software firm he'd built from nothing. He told her about his net worth, a number so vast, $3.7 billion, that it sounded like a joke. He told her about his past, about the woman he had loved, his ex-fiancée, who had seen him only as a walking bank vault. He told her how her betrayal had shattered his ability to trust, how it had made him blind to the good in people. "My father," Kale said, his voice thick with emotion, "on his deathbed, he told me something. He said, 'Kale, you have built an empire of money, but your heart is a pauper's hut. The greatest wealth is a heart you can trust. Go find one, but leave your money behind when you search for it.'" So he had come up with the plan, the disguise. He would become what he felt, blind, lost, and without value. He would walk the streets offering nothing, to see who would stop for a man who had nothing to give. "For weeks, I found only what I expected," he said, his eyes full of pain. "Indifference, irritation, greed. I was about to give up. I thought my father was wrong. And then it started to rain, and you crossed the street." Amara just stared at him, her mind reeling. The modest apartment, the worn coat, the vulnerability. It had all been a lie, a test. A part of her felt a flash of anger, of humiliation. She had been the subject of an experiment. But then she looked at his face. She saw the genuine anguish there, the desperate hope, the profound loneliness he had been hiding. And the anger dissolved, replaced by a dizzying sense of the absurd. She started to laugh. It was a strange, watery sound. Then the laughter turned into a sob. She covered her face with her hands, overwhelmed by the sheer, insane reality of it all. A billionaire, disguised as a blind man. Her blind man, Kai. "A blind man?" she said through her tears, looking up at him. The humor of it was a lifeline in the sea of shock. "You're worth billions of dollars, and you had me bringing you pepper soup in a thermos?" The tension in the room broke. Kale let out a laugh of his own, a sound of pure relief. He knelt before her, taking her hands in his. His were warm and steady. The best pepper soup I have ever had, he said, his smile tender. Amara's laughter faded, and the tears came again, this time from a deeper place. The overwhelm, the sheer magnitude of it all. Why? She whispered, her voice barely audible. It was the most important question in the world. Why me? Was it just because I helped you cross the street? No, he said, his gaze intense, unwavering. It was never just that. It was how you did it. You spoke to me like a person, not a problem to be solved. And then you walked me home. You lied and said you were going that way. You gave up your time, your comfort, for a stranger. You came back. You brought me soup. You told me your dreams. You told me your pain. You found my wallet with $500 in it when your landlord was threatening to evict you, and you handed it back to me without a second's hesitation. He squeezed her hands. Amara, don't you see? I was the one who was blind, blinded by cynicism and wealth. You have the clearest sight of anyone I've ever met. You see people. You see their hearts. You didn't see a blind man you could pity. You saw a human being who was hungry, and you offered him food. You saw a man who was lonely, and you offered him your friendship. He looked into her eyes, and she saw his own were shining with unshed tears. You asked me, why you? It's because in a world of performance, you are real. It's because you have a quiet dignity that is more powerful than any army. It's because your mother taught you that you don't need sight to see, and you live that truth every single day. I don't want to just invest in your restaurant, Amara. I want to invest in you, in us, if you'll have me. The question hung in the air, more valuable than all the billions in his bank account. He wasn't offering her his money. He was offering her his broken, healing heart. And in that moment, Amara knew that the man she had fallen for wasn't the blind man in the simple apartment or the billionaire in the glass palace. It was the man kneeling before her, the man who had been brave enough to make himself vulnerable, the man who had finally been seen. The next 6 months were a whirlwind, a dream from which Amara kept expecting to wake up. Cale was true to his word. He was not a prince who had come to rescue a damsel. He was a partner who had come to empower a queen. He set her up not with a handout, but with a team. Business consultants, brand strategists, world-class chefs. They didn't tell her what to do. They asked her questions. They listened as she spoke passionately about her vision for Amara's Bowl. It wouldn't just be a restaurant, it would be an experience. A place that celebrated the vibrant, complex flavors of Nigerian cuisine, elevated to fine dining, but stripped of all pretension. The heart of the menu would be her mother's recipes, especially the pepper soup. Amara blossomed. The quiet, exhausted caregiver was replaced by a confident, articulate CEO. She had always had the vision. Cale simply gave her the tools to build it. He watched from the sidelines, a proud smile ever present on his face. Their relationship deepened, away from the boardrooms and business plans. They spent hours talking, walking, simply being together. He took her to his family's ancestral village in Cameroon, a place of rich earth and deep traditions. She introduced him to her brother, David, who, after his initial shock, found a fast friend in Cale, bonding over art and a shared, quiet intensity. Cale flew her mother in from Lagos, first class. The reunion at the airport was a flood of joyful tears. Her mother looked at Cale, not at his expensive watch or his tailored suit, but deep into his eyes. She took his hand, then turned to Amara and said in Igbo, "This one's eyes were closed, but his heart was open. It found yours." Then the invitation arrived. It was thick, cream-colored cardstock, embossed with a golden V. The Vance Foundation Annual Charity Gala. The society event of the year. Host, Mrs. Eleanor Vance. Amara's hand trembled as she held it. It felt like a ghost from a past life had reached out to touch her. All the humiliation of that day came rushing back. The accusation, the walk of shame, common thief. Cale found her staring at it, her face pale. He came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "I know," he said softly. He had known this would be hard. In fact, he had engineered it. His $10 million donation had been intentionally anonymous until the last moment, ensuring he and his partner would be the guests of honor. "I don't want to go," Amara whispered. "I don't want to see her." "I know," he said again, "but you are not the person who left that house a year ago. That person was defined by what she had lost. You, now, are defined by what you have built. This isn't about revenge, Amara. Revenge is a fire that burns the person who holds it. This is about grace. It's time to close that chapter, not by shouting, but by simply showing her who you are." He turned her around to face him. "And I will be by your side every step of the way." And so, the night of the gala arrived. The night of the silent Rolls Royce and the golden gown. As Amara stepped out of the car, the flashbulbs blinding, she took a deep breath. She could smell the rain in the air, a faint echo of that night months ago. She felt Cale's hand, warm and steady on her back. She was not the river anymore, wearing down the stone. She was the ocean, and the tide was coming in. They walked through the parted sea of gawking elites, their progress a slow, deliberate march toward destiny. They passed Eleanor Vance, a statue of rage and disbelief. Cale's calm, devastating acknowledgement. "Mrs. Vance, I believe you know my partner, Amara Okoro," landed like a perfectly thrown stone into a still, scummy pond. Eleanor, her carefully constructed world shattering around her, did the one thing she knew how to do. She attacked. "Partner?" she shrieked, her voice shrill and ugly, breaking the spell of the room's silence. "This woman is a thief. She stole from my own mother. Security, get her out of here." Two hapless security guards started to move forward, looking confused. But Cale held up a hand, and they stopped dead. The entire room was watching, utterly captivated. This was better than theater. Cale's voice, when he spoke, was not loud, but it carried the chilling weight of absolute power. "No," he said, his eyes locked on Eleanor's. "The only thief in this room is the person who steals another's dignity, the person who uses their power to crush those they see as beneath them." He gestured to Amara, his expression softening into one of pure reverence. "This is Amara Okoro. She is not a thief. She is the CEO of the Asongwe Culinary Group. She is the visionary behind Amara's Bowl, a new national restaurant chain we are launching next month. And she is the sole reason I was inspired to donate $10 million to what I thought was a worthy cause." Each sentence was a hammer blow. You could see the color drain from Eleanor's face. Her husband, standing beside her, looked like he was about to be physically ill. Cale left her there, stewing in her public humiliation, and led Amara toward the stage. He helped her up the steps, then turned to the podium. A microphone was handed to him. The silence in the room was now absolute. "Good evening," he began, his voice resonating through the ballroom. "I am Cale Asongwe. I am here tonight because I believe in giving back. But I came to learn what is truly worth giving from a woman who had almost nothing. I want to tell you a short story, he told them. He didn't use names. He spoke of a man, lost and blind in the rain. A man ignored by hundreds of busy, important people. He spoke of one woman who stopped. A woman who was tired and cold and had every reason to keep walking. He told them how she had guided him, how she had walked him home, how she had offered him the simple, profound gift of her time. "That woman," Cale said, his voice thick with emotion, "taught me that a person's net worth is not what is in their bank account. It is what is in their heart. It is the kindness they show when no one is watching, the integrity they hold when they are falsely accused." His eyes found Amara's in the crowd. "That woman is Amara Okoro." He went on to announce the launch of Amara's Bowl and his new foundation, which would be endowed with 20% of the restaurant's profits, dedicated to ending homelessness in the city. The room, which had been silent in shock, erupted in spontaneous, thunderous applause. It was a wave of validation, washing over Amara, cleansing the last remnants of her old wounds. But Cale wasn't finished. He put down the microphone and walked over to where Amara was standing at the side of the stage. He took both of her hands in his. "My father told me that the greatest wealth is a heart you can trust," he said, his voice now just for her, though the whole room was straining to hear. "I stopped looking for a heart to trust, Amara, because I have found a heart to love." He dropped to one knee. Gasps rippled through the ballroom. Eleanor Vance let out a small, strangled sound, like a dying animal. "Amara Okoro," Cale said, his eyes shining. "You walked me home when I was lost. Will you let me walk with you for the rest of our lives? Will you marry me?" He opened a small black box. Inside was a diamond, a magnificent, flawless stone that refracted the light of the chandeliers into 1,000 tiny rainbows. But Amara barely saw the diamond. Her eyes were locked on Cale's. Tears were streaming down her face, but these were not the tears of pain or overwhelm. They were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes. Of course, yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger. It was a perfect fit. The applause that followed was deafening, a standing ovation from the city's elite, who now saw Amara not as an intruder, but as their new queen. Cale stood up, kissed her gently, and then held her hand up for all to see. In the front row, Amara's brother David was beaming, while her mother wept silently with pride. Across the room, Eleanor Vance, forgotten and disgraced, slipped out a side door, her reign of shallow cruelty officially over. Later, when the chaos had subsided, Amara looked at the ring. It was breathtaking. But as she looked closer, she saw a tiny, almost invisible engraving on the inside of the band. It was a perfect, miniature soup bowl. And next to it, a date. The day they had met in the rain. The aftermath of that night was swift and decisive. It was, as Cale had promised, not an act of revenge, but a simple rebalancing of the universal scales. Amara and Cale were married 3 months later in a stunning ceremony that was the perfect fusion of their two worlds. It took place not in a stuffy ballroom, but in a beautiful botanical garden. Amara wore a gown designed by a young, up-and-coming Nigerian designer. Her mother, draped in magnificent lace, walked her down the aisle. David was Cale's best man. Marcus, for his part, was seen smiling. Once. The food was, of course, catered by the kitchens of Amara's Bowl, and the centerpiece of the feast was a tureen of the most fragrant, delicious pepper soup anyone had ever tasted. Amara's bowl opened a month after the wedding to rave reviews and lines around the block. It wasn't just the food, which was spectacular, it was the feeling of the place. Amara had infused it with her own spirit of generosity and welcome. The restaurant was an immediate runaway success. Within a year, there were 5 locations in 3 cities. The charitable foundation Cale had announced became a major force for good in the city, providing not just meals, but shelter, job training, and a path back to dignity for hundreds of homeless individuals. Amara was no longer just a CEO. She was a beloved philanthropist, a symbol of hope and grace. David, with Cale's enthusiastic support, was accepted into the Rhode Island School of Design, his tuition and expenses covered for the next 4 years. His talent, once a quiet secret, was now set to flourish on a world stage. For Eleanor Vance, the fall was as rapid as Amara's rise had been. The public humiliation at the gala was only the beginning. Her fair-weather friends abandoned her overnight. Her husband's precarious real estate empire, built on reputation and high-risk loans, crumbled when the banks called in their debts. The story of Cale Asongwe's $10 million donation and its true inspiration became a legend in the city's financial circles, and no one wanted to do business with the Vances anymore. They lost the mansion, they lost the cars, they lost the status they had worshipped above all else. The Vance Foundation was investigated as a vanity project with exorbitant administrative costs and very little actual charitable output. It was a hollow shell, just like its founder. About a year after the gala, Amara was spending an afternoon volunteering at the first shelter her foundation had opened. It was a cold day, much like the one on which she had met Cale. She was in the kitchen, her sleeves rolled up, stirring a massive pot of pepper soup and serving bowls to the residents who filed through the line. It was her favorite part of the week, a way to stay connected to the principle that had started it all. A woman shuffled forward in the line, her head down, a thin, worn coat wrapped tightly around her. She looked tired, beaten down by life. When she reached the front, she held out her bowl without looking up. Amara ladled a generous portion of soup into it. "Would you like some extra bread?" she asked gently. At the sound of her voice, the woman looked up. Her eyes, once sharp and cruel, were now dull and empty. Her face, stripped of its expensive cosmetics, was just a sad, tired mask. It was Eleanor Vance. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. 1,000 things could have been said. 1,000 old wounds could have been reopened. Amara could have gloated. She could have reminded Eleanor of her words, common thief. She could have savored the moment of perfect karmic justice. But Amara was the ocean, not the fire. She felt a pang of pity for this broken woman. She didn't say a word. She simply took a thick slice of freshly baked bread, added it to Eleanor's tray, and then took another piece and added that as well. She pushed the tray toward her with a small, sad smile. It was a smile of forgiveness, a smile of grace. Eleanor took the tray, her hand trembling. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. A single, difficult tear rolled down her cheek. She turned and shuffled away, disappearing into the crowd of the hungry and the lost, finally and utterly defeated, not by vengeance, but by a kindness she had never known how to give, and now did not feel she deserved to receive. Later that week, Cale came home with a small, velvet box. He handed it to Amara. "My investigators finally found it," he said. She opened it. Inside, nestled on the velvet, was a small, simple silver brooch. It was the one Mrs. Vance had accused her of stealing. It had been found behind a heavy dresser in Clara's old room. where it had likely fallen years ago. It was, as Eleanor had said, not valuable. A piece of costume jewelry worth maybe $5. But it had cost Amara her job, her reputation, her peace of mind. It had cost her $1,450.75. Amara looked at the brooch, then at Cale. She closed the box and placed it on her desk in her home office. It would sit there, not as a trophy, but as a reminder of what a lie can cost and what the truth is ultimately worth. The next day, she wrote a check. It was from the foundation, the first grant given to a family moving from the shelter into their own permanent apartment. The amount was for $1,450.75. The scales were balanced. This story, in the end, is not about a poor girl who found a rich man. It is not a fairy tale about gowns and billionaires. It is a story about sight. It is a reminder that the most profound blindness has nothing to do with our eyes, but with our hearts. True sight is the ability to see the humanity in others, especially when the world tells you they are worthless. It is the ability to look past the disguise, the status, the bank account, and see the person standing in the rain, in need of a helping hand. The greatest measure of our character is not what we do in the dazzling spotlight of the gala when everyone is watching. It is what we do on a cold, rainy Tuesday for a stranger, for no reason at all, except that it is the right thing to do. It is in those quiet moments that our true worth is revealed. And it is in those moments that we find the things that are truly priceless. If this story moved your heart, subscribe and hit that notification bell, because every tale has a lesson, and Alfred's Folktales never forgets.